The rain came down over the Scottish Highlands like a judgment. It had been raining since Edinburgh, since before Edinburgh, if you asked the locals. And now, somewhere north of Rannoch Moor, the night had swallowed the world whole. The Caledonian sleeper pressed on through the dark, its brass fittings gleaming, its velvet curtains drawn against the wilderness outside. The year was 1953. The war had been over for 8 years, but its shadows travelled in certain faces, in certain silences, in the way some passengers ordered their whiskey and stared at nothing. Inside the train, the dining car hummed with low conversation and cigarette smoke. The lamps cast everything in amber. Rain hammered the windows like 1,000 impatient fingers. No one could see anything beyond the glass, only their own reflections, looking back. Victor Ashby held court at the far end of the dining car, as he always did. A famous man becomes accustomed to the shape of a room arranging itself around him. His photographs had appeared in Life, in the Times, in galleries from London to New York. He had stood at the edges of history and aimed his lens at the worst of it. Now he was telling a story, loudly, with his hands, the way men do when they want to be overheard. Across the car, at a small table by the window, his assistant Nora Finch ate her soup in silence. She had heard all of his stories. She had developed all of his film. She knew which images he had printed and which ones he had locked away in the dark. At the bar, Colonel Hartley nursed a brandy, his briefcase between his feet, his eyes on Ashby with an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite fear. Eleanor Voss, still in black, studied her reflection in the rain-soaked window. Thomas Pryce moved through the car punching tickets, his smile practiced and his hands unsteady. And in the corner, Margaret Dale turned a page of her novel without reading a word of it. It was 11:30 when Thomas Pryce knocked on the door of compartment 6. He had been asked to deliver a nightcap, a single malt, no ice, as the passenger had requested. He knocked twice, then a third time. The corridor swayed gently as the train took a long curve northward. Pryce tried the handle. The door opened. The lamp inside was still burning. Victor Ashby sat in the chair beside the small fold-down table, still dressed, his evening glass tipped sideways on the surface beside him, a dark ring spreading across the white linen. He might have been sleeping. But his face told a different story. His lips held a faint bluish tinge. His hands were still. The camera case on the floor lay open, the photographs inside fanned out as though someone had searched through them in a hurry. Pryce backed into the corridor and pressed himself against the wall. The rain screamed against the windows. Somewhere ahead, the track dipped into a flooded valley. The train shuddered and slowed, and then it stopped. The driver came back through the carriages with his lantern and his bad news. The track ahead was submerged. The track behind was no better. A culvert had given way in the dark. They were marooned on a hillside in the Scottish Highlands, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm. No signal, no road for miles, no rescue before morning, if the rain relented. It was Margaret Dale who said it first, very quietly, in the corridor outside compartment 6, that someone should find out what had killed him before someone else turned up the same way. It was Inspector Callum Reid who answered her. He had been standing further down the corridor for several minutes already, his pipe unlit, his overcoat still buttoned. He had the particular stillness of a man who had been listening before anyone knew he was there. He told Pryce to lock the compartment and pocket the key. He told the remaining passengers to return to the dining car and stay there. He said it the way a man says something when he expects to be obeyed. They obeyed. Reid interviewed them one by one in the small service compartment at the end of the carriage, a single lamp between them. Nora Finch said she had retired early, a headache, and had not left her compartment after 9 o'clock. She said this looking directly at him, her hands folded in her lap, her ink-stained fingers perfectly still. Colonel Hartley said he did not know Victor Ashby personally. He had simply travelled north on business. He would not say what business. He set the briefcase on his knees and did not let go of it. Eleanor Voss said she and Victor were old acquaintances, nothing more, and that she had no reason whatsoever to wish him ill. She said it beautifully, the way beautiful people say untrue things. Thomas Pryce said he owed money to people who sometimes used men like Ashby as intermediaries. He had not meant to say that much. He looked frightened the moment it was out. And Margaret Dale, who claimed to sell books in Inverness, described in accurate detail the layout of Ashby's private compartment before she had any reason to have seen it. She corrected herself quickly, but not quickly enough. Reed returned to compartment 6 alone. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before entering, the way a man enters a room that has already decided something without him. The photographs scattered from the camera case were not artistic prints. They were contact sheets, raw and unedited, the kind a photographer makes for himself before he chooses what the world will see. Most were landscapes, ruins, old men in fields, but 3 photographs at the bottom of the case were different. They showed uniformed men at a prisoner camp, 1945 or thereabouts. The faces were clear. One of them was younger and thinner, but unmistakable. Colonel Hartley. The activities depicted were not military honors. Reed tucked the photographs into his coat. Then he noticed the glass on the table, the single malt Ashby had ordered from Pryce. He lifted it carefully and held it to the lamp. A faint, oily residue clung to the inside rim, not whiskey. Something else entirely, something that, dissolved in spirits, would be almost undetectable until it was too late. The poison had not come from the bar. It had come from someone who knew what they were doing and who had time to prepare. The briefcase unlocked everything, or seemed to. When Reed returned to the dining car and quietly informed Colonel Hartley that he had seen the photographs, Hartley broke. Not violently. Men like Hartley don't break violently. He crumbled slowly, like a wall that has been wet too long. He admitted he had known Ashby since the war. He admitted Ashby had been blackmailing him for 4 years, not money, but influence. Introductions, signatures. Doors opened in dark corridors of power. He admitted the briefcase contained documents he had been transporting at Ashby's demand. He admitted, with his voice barely above the rain, that he had thought about killing the man. But he had not done it. He had not done it because he was afraid of what Nora Finch already knew. It was Eleanor Voss who provided the apparent answer. Her husband, dead these 3 days, had been one of Ashby's earliest patrons. She had travelled to Edinburgh for the funeral. What Reed didn't know yet was that her husband had died at the bottom of his own staircase, under circumstances a coroner had found inconvenient. She had motive layered upon motive. She had means. She had ice in her veins, and whiskey in her glass, and fury behind her beautiful eyes. Everything pointed at her. Which was, of course, the problem. Reed found Margaret Dale at the very end of the train, in the observation car no one used after dark. She was standing at the rear window, watching the flooded moor recede behind them in the dark. Or would have been, if they were still moving. Instead, she was watching nothing. Just rain. She did not turn around when he entered. He told her what he knew, that her name was not Margaret Dale, that she had been a photojournalist herself once, briefly before the war, that Victor Ashby had stolen her work, a series of photographs she had taken in Berlin in 1938, images that should have made her career. Instead, he had published them under his own name. She had spent 15 years becoming invisible. She became very still. The rain filled the silence between them. He told her he had found the vial in her coat pocket while she slept in the dining car 10 minutes ago, tucked inside the spine of the novel she never read. She turned around then. Her face was not what he expected. It was not guilt. It was something older, quieter, and far more complicated than that. She did not confess to Margaret Dale's crime, because it was not Margaret Dale's crime to confess to. Reed had laid the trap carefully, and it had caught the right person. Simply not the right way around. Margaret Dale's vial contained developing fluid. She was a photographer still, in her quiet, invisible way. She had recognized Ashby on the platform at Edinburgh and boarded the train to confront him, nothing more. The poison, an alkaloid compound, careful and professional, had been administered earlier in the evening, not in the nightcap Pryce had delivered, but in the first drink of the night, the one Ashby had poured himself from the bottle of scotch in his own compartment. The bottle Nora Finch had placed there that afternoon when she carried his luggage aboard. Nora Finch, who had spent 3 years in a darkroom with a man who had sold photographs that were not his to sell. Not stolen work, something worse. Images of the dead, civilians, A village in Korea, 1950, that Ashby had photographed before calling in the coordinates that destroyed it in exchange for exclusive access to the aftermath. Nora had found the negatives in his files 18 months ago. She had carried that knowledge like a stone in her chest ever since. She had tried every other way. She had written letters. She had been ignored, threatened, discredited. So she had come prepared for this train, on this night, in this rain. She sat across from Reed in the service compartment and told him all of it, carefully, without apology. Outside, the storm was beginning, very slowly, to ease. By 4 in the morning, the rain had stopped. By 6, the water on the track had receded enough that the driver walked the line and declared it passable. The Caledonian sleeper eased north again through a Highland dawn that was pale and washed clean and indifferent to everything that had happened in the dark. Reed sat in the dining car with his cold tea and his thoughts. Pryce moved through the carriages, looking older than he had the night before. Eleanor Voss watched the moor from her window, and whatever she was feeling, she kept it behind glass, like everything else. Colonel Hartley disembarked at the first stop and was met on the platform by 2 men in plain clothes. He had known they would come eventually. Margaret Dale, her real name was Agnes Morrow, photographed the sunrise from the observation car with a small camera she had kept hidden in her luggage. The images would not make the papers. They never did. Nora Finch was taken off the train at Fort William by a constable Reed had radioed ahead to meet them. She walked across the platform without looking back. Victor Ashby's photographs, all of them, including the ones that should never have been taken, were locked in Reed's case for the journey south. Some stories, he thought, need to reach the light, even if the light takes time. The Highlands stretched away in every direction, vast and ancient and unmoved, as they always had been, as they always would be. The train moved on through the morning. The rain did not return.